The girl was no more than 14, yet her frame carried the burdens of someone far older. Her skin, once smooth with the glow of youth, had grown rough from sun and labor, and her small hands bore calluses from endless tasks. Despite this, her eyes held a softness that revealed the gentleness of her spirit. She was kind to everyone she met, always quick to smile or share what little she had, even when her own life was heavy with hardship. Her kindness was quiet, unassuming, the sort that sought no reward, yet it shone all the brighter against the cruelty of her surroundings. From the first faint light of dawn until the last ember of dusk, she was the first to rise and the last to rest. Each morning before the rooster crowed, she would already be fetching water from the distant well. The heavy clay pot cut into her shoulders, but she carried it without complaint, knowing that the household depended on her strength. She would sweep the compound, stoke the fire, grind millet, and prepare food while others still stirred in their beds. Her stepmother's voice would rise soon after, not with thanks but with demands: "Work faster. Don't waste the day." And so the girl hurried, never daring to pause, never daring to rest her aching arms. When the sun climbed high, scorching the earth, she was sent to the fields to weed or gather firewood. Her thin frame bent beneath heavy bundles of sticks, yet she bore them dutifully back to the compound. If the cooking pot tipped slightly or if the food was late, her stepmother's sharp tongue lashed at her. "Useless girl," she would hiss, while the step-siblings, lounging in the shade, laughed at her expense. Any mistake, real or imagined, was pinned on her, and she was scolded even when she had done nothing wrong. As evening approached, when others sat to eat, her stepmother often withheld food, declaring that she had not earned it or that there was not enough for her. The girl would nibble at scraps, her stomach twisting with hunger, and yet she never allowed bitterness to poison her gentle spirit. At night, when the others slept, she would stay awake longer still, washing the pots, mending clothes, or patching the roof where the wind had loosened it. Only when the moon was high would she allow herself to lie down, weary bones sinking into a mat so thin it offered little comfort. Her dreams, though rare and fleeting, were of a different life. A life where she could laugh freely, where her hands created beauty instead of only toil, where love and kindness surrounded her instead of scorn. Sometimes, while pounding grain or carrying water, she imagined herself running barefoot through wide fields, the wind in her hair, no one calling her name in anger. Yet each time she tried to hold on to such visions, her stepmother's voice dragged her back into reality. In the eyes of the community, she was a hard-working child, but no one dared intervene. Some pitied her, some whispered behind closed doors, but all kept their distance. Her stepmother had a reputation for a sharp tongue and a cunning mind, and few wanted to be entangled in her affairs. So the girl endured in silence, her suffering hidden beneath the rhythm of daily chores. Despite the cruelty, the girl remained gentle. She would feed stray animals with bits of leftover grain, comfort younger children when they cried, and even greet neighbors with respect, never speaking ill of her stepmother. It was her kindness that kept a faint spark of warmth alive in her heart, even as the weight of endless toil threatened to snuff it out. But deep inside, beneath the layers of obedience and silence, there was a quiet strength building. She had learned patience in pain, endurance in labor, and dignity in the face of humiliation. Though her stepmother believed she was breaking her, the truth was that the girl was being shaped into something far greater. What no one could see yet was that every task, every hardship, every scolding, was preparing her for the moment when fate, and unseen forces, would rise to turn the tables. The girl's stepmother had a heart hardened by envy and greed. From the very beginning, she had viewed the girl not as a child to be nurtured, but as a burden to be used. While her own children were coddled and shielded from work, the girl was driven into endless labor. The imbalance was clear. The step-siblings lounged in shade, eating sweet fruits and gossiping with friends, while she bent her back in fields, carried heavy loads and endured scorching sun. It was as though every task in the household had been carved out for her alone, while others reaped the benefits of her labor. The exploitation was not merely about work, it was about control. The stepmother relished in her power over the girl. Whenever the child completed a chore, she would be given another, harsher one, ensuring that there was never a moment of rest. If the girl prepared food, she was told it was tasteless. If she cleaned the compound, she was accused of missing a spot. No effort was ever enough, no act was ever acknowledged. The stepmother's voice was sharp, her words heavy with scorn. "You were born only to serve." Each insult chipped at the girl's spirit, but she bore it quietly, her strength hidden beneath obedience. The step-siblings, shaped by their mother's example, mirrored her cruelty. They took delight in mocking the girl, stealing the little food she was given, and blaming her whenever things went wrong. If a clay pot broke, they claimed she dropped it. If the fire went out, they said she was careless. Their lies flowed easily, and the stepmother accepted them without question, punishing the girl without pause. To them, she was not family, not even human at times. She was the scapegoat, the one upon whom all blame could fall without consequence. Behind this cruelty lay jealousy. The girl, despite her hardships, carried an inner light that the stepmother and her children could not extinguish. Her kindness, her humility, and the quiet dignity with which she endured her suffering made others notice her. Even in the market, villagers would sometimes remark, "That girl has a good heart," or "She works harder than anyone else." These words, though simple, fueled the stepmother's envy. She feared that the girl's natural goodness would one day overshadow her own children, exposing their laziness and selfishness. Greed sharpened that fear. The stepmother worried that sympathy might earn the girl opportunities or gifts meant for her own offspring. And so, her cruelty intensified, rooted in a twisted desire to break the child before she could ever rise. Yet, while some villagers pitied the girl, none spoke aloud in her defense. A few neighbors whispered at night, shaking their heads at the injustices they saw, but fear silenced them. They knew the stepmother's tongue was venomous, her influence wide. To stand against her was to invite shame or conflict, something few wished to endure. Others convinced themselves that it was not their place to interfere, that perhaps the girl truly deserved the treatment she received. Ignorance became a shield, protecting their conscience while leaving the girl to suffer. The silence of the community deepened the girl's loneliness. Each day, as she carried water past neighbors who looked away, she felt the weight of abandonment pressing down. Not only was she denied love in her home, but she was also denied protection from her village. It was as though she lived in a world where every voice was muted, where cruelty thrived because no one dared to stop it. The stepmother mistook the girl's silence for weakness, never realizing that patience was a form of power. She believed that by overworking her, by stripping her of dignity, she was making the child smaller, less significant. In truth, every act of cruelty only deepened the girl's quiet resilience. Though her body ached and her heart longed for kindness, her spirit learned endurance, the kind that would one day outlast envy, greed, and even cruelty itself. The cruelty of her stepfamily was relentless, yet it could not extinguish her inner light. Though she walked in shadows, the spark within her grew brighter, unseen by those who sought to crush her. And while the villagers remained silent, the unseen world, the spirits, the ancestors, the forces that govern justice, watched closely, preparing for the day when their patience would give way to action. Though her days were filled with endless labor, the girl's mind often wandered far beyond the confines of her harsh reality. She was young, no more than 16, yet her soul carried the weight of an old spirit. When her hands scrubbed clay pots until her skin cracked, when her back bent under bundles of firewood heavier than her thin frame, her thoughts drifted to a world where kindness was not a dream but a way of life. She dreamed of a family that did not see her as a burden or a tool. Sometimes, while she knelt at the river washing clothes until her fingers numbed, she imagined a voice calling her softly, not to order her, not to scold, but to praise her efforts and ask about her heart. The river's ripples became messengers of her secret longings, carrying them away as though the spirits themselves were listening. At night, when exhaustion pressed her body into the hard mat where she slept in the corner of the hut, her spirit awakened into visions. She saw herself walking barefoot across a field of golden grass, her steps light, her arms free of burdens. The wind in her dreams whispered her name gently, unlike the harsh tones of her stepmother, and the sky seemed to open as if welcoming her into a greater destiny. She never spoke of these dreams. To her stepfamily, such words would be mocked as foolish fantasies. Yet she clung to them, believing they were gifts of hope planted by unseen hands. Her gentle spirit showed itself even in the smallest ways. After long days of carrying water from the river, she sometimes paused to drop a pebble back into the stream and whispered a wish, "May someone somewhere be kind." When birds perched on the thatched roof above her, she offered them crumbs of leftover grain even if it meant having less for herself. The animals in the compound seemed drawn to her, sensing the kindness that others overlooked. A stray dog that others kicked away would curl by her feet at night, and she would smile faintly in her sleep, knowing at least one creature on earth recognized her worth. Despite her exhaustion, she carried within her a quiet resilience. Her stepmother tried to break her spirit with endless demands: fetch more firewood, fetch more water, grind more grain, cook for all, clean for all, but the girl did not harden her heart. She bore her pain in silence, as though protecting something sacred inside herself. She knew that cruelty, like fire, only consumed itself when left unchecked. There were nights when she lay awake, her body trembling from fatigue, and asked herself why fate had chosen her for this path. Yet even in those moments her heart whispered, "Do not hate them. Your spirit is not theirs to poison." It was this quiet strength, invisible to her stepfamily, that caught the attention of forces beyond the human eye. Foreshadowings of spiritual intervention began in subtle ways. When she carried a pot of water balanced on her head, she sometimes felt the weight lighten suddenly, as if unseen hands steadied it. When she collapsed in the field one scorching afternoon, shade fell over her though no tree was near, just the drifting shadow of a cloud that lingered longer than it should. Once, when her stepmother deliberately threw ashes into her food, the smoke curled into shapes that looked almost like protective figures before fading away. The villagers may not have spoken up for her, but the spirits that lingered in silence were watching. They had seen her patience, her refusal to repay evil with evil, her ability to dream even in chains of exhaustion. Such purity was rare, and such endurance was not meant to go unnoticed. The dreams she carried were not just her own longing, they were whispers planted in her by the unseen, preparing her for a turning of fate that no cruelty could prevent. In her heart, she began to believe that her suffering was not the whole story. The way the moonlight often fell softly across her resting face, the way the wind sometimes seemed to sing as it passed the hut, all hinted at something greater. Her stepfamily might believe she was powerless, but each day of toil only sharpened the strength of her spirit. And so, beneath her fatigue, her dreams grew brighter. She did not yet know that these dreams were more than illusions, they were promises. By clinging to hope when everything tried to strip it away, she was aligning herself with forces that would, in time, turn the tables. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the spirit's answer to her silent prayers. The nights in the compound were always heavy with silence, broken only by the distant cry of crickets or the wind rattling the dry leaves. For most, the darkness was a time of rest, but for the girl, it became the hour when strange signs stirred around her. After days filled with endless toil, she would lie down on her worn mat in the corner of the hut, her body aching, yet her mind alert to the whispers of the unseen. At first she thought it was only her imagination. One night, as the moon cast its pale light through the cracks of the thatched roof, she heard a faint murmur, soft as the rustling of leaves, yet too clear to be the wind. It called her name, not harshly like her stepmother, but tenderly, as though reminding her she had not been forgotten. She sat up, trembling, scanning the shadows, but no one was there. The only thing she could see was the flickering flame of the dying fire, dancing against the mud walls. Yet the voice lingered in her heart, leaving her both unsettled and comforted. Soon the signs multiplied. Shadows shifted in ways that made no sense. The stepmother would put out the fire before sleep, but the girl would awaken at midnight to see faint shapes forming in the corner of the hut, swaying like tall figures dressed in flowing robes. They never came close enough to frighten her, yet their presence carried a weight that silenced her fear. The air would grow cool, and though her body was exhausted, she felt strength settle into her heart. Her dreams also changed. No longer were they only the faint longings of a girl yearning for kindness. Now she saw visions too vivid to be ignored. Her grandmother, long gone from this world, appeared to her in a field of light. "Child," the grandmother said, her voice rich and soothing, "the spirits see your suffering. Do not despair. Your pain is not unseen." Another night, a man she did not recognize, tall and draped in ancient garments, placed his hand over her head in her dream and whispered, "The chains of cruelty cannot bind the soul the spirits protect." When she awoke, she found her heart racing, her skin tingling as though the touch had been real. There were nights when she dreamed of the desert winds carrying voices. They spoke not in one tongue but in many, yet she understood each word. They told her of balance, of justice that always comes, of the foolishness of those who build power on the tears of the innocent. She woke with tears streaming down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that she was not alone in her struggle. Even in her waking hours, hints of the invisible world brushed against her life. Once, while gathering firewood, she felt as though someone walked beside her, their steps in rhythm with hers, though no one was there. Another time, she was about to stumble under the weight of a water pot, when the pot shifted slightly, balancing itself as though invisible hands steadied it. She froze, her eyes wide, but then a calm washed over her. It was as though the unseen ones wanted her to know, "We are here." Her stepmother, blinded by envy, noticed nothing. But the girl could no longer deny it. When she slept, she often felt a gentle breeze sweep across her face, even on nights when the air was still. The dog that always curled by her side would suddenly lift its head, eyes fixed on empty space, wagging its tail as if greeting an unseen guest. Once she awoke to find strange patterns drawn in the ashes near the fire, circles and spirals she did not understand. To her they were not frightening. They were reminders. She began to feel courage growing within her. The voices did not always speak clearly, and the shadows did not always show themselves, but the consistency of their presence became her secret strength. Where once she had only her fragile dreams to hold on to, now she had the certainty that she was being watched over. The cruelty of her stepmother no longer felt like the final truth of her existence. Somewhere in realms beyond her sight, a different story was unfolding. There were nights when she would whisper back into the silence. "If you hear me," she said softly, "do not let my heart be crushed." And in return, the firelight would flicker brighter, or the coolness of the air would press against her skin like a comforting embrace. She did not need to see them fully to know she was not abandoned. The girl's suffering had been deep, but now it was no longer empty. It had become a thread woven into something larger, something guided by forces she could not yet name. The whispers, the shadows, the dreams, each was a promise, each a piece of a mystery preparing her for what was to come. And though her stepmother still barked orders and her step-siblings laughed cruelly, the girl walked with a secret truth in her heart. She was not alone, not in this life, not in her pain, and not in her hope. The girl's life, already burdened with endless labor, grew darker as her stepfamily's greed knew no limits. What had once been long hours of work became unbearable chains of exploitation. Every morning before the sun had even risen, her stepmother's sharp voice pierced the quiet air. "Fetch the water. Grind the grain. Sweep the yard. Tend the animals." Her hands never rested, yet nothing she did ever satisfied them. If she finished one chore, another was thrust upon her, heavier and crueler than the last. The stepmother's greed was not simply for her labor, but for the complete erasure of her worth. She wanted the girl to be nothing more than a tool, a shadow without a voice. Meals were cooked, yet the girl was given only scraps, hard crusts of bread, a few grains of millet or leftover broth so thin it could barely be called food. Her step-siblings, fattened on the choicest portions, sneered at her hunger. "You do not deserve more," they jeered. "A servant eats only what she earns." Even rest was denied her. At night, while others slept in comfort, she was ordered to keep watch over dying fires, to mend torn clothes by dim light, or to scrub pots until her hands were raw. If she dared close her eyes, her stepmother struck her awake with harsh words or a swift hand. The girl's body grew frail, her bones sharp against her skin, but her spirit clung to the last threads of dignity. The cruelty escalated beyond reason. The step-siblings began inventing tasks only to see her struggle. They scattered grain across the floor and demanded she pick each kernel by hand. They dirted the yard deliberately and ordered her to sweep it clean again and again. They even mocked her with false kindness, offering food only to snatch it away and laugh at her disappointed face. The girl endured it all in silence, her eyes lowered, though in her heart she longed for the justice she could not yet see. The villagers, though they sometimes glimpsed her suffering, turned away. Some feared the stepmother's sharp tongue and cunning influence. Others chose ignorance, convincing themselves it was not their place to interfere. To them, she was only a poor girl living under the roof of those who claimed to care for her. They did not see the hunger in her eyes or the way her hands trembled from exhaustion. Her stepmother grew bolder in her cruelty, demanding not only labor but obedience without question. "You are nothing," she spat one evening, when the girl asked timidly for a sip of milk. "Nothing but a burden I should have cast aside long ago." These words struck deeper than any blow, for they sought to strip the girl of her very sense of being. Yet in her silence, strength began to form. Each denial, each demand, each cruel laugh etched resilience into her soul. Though starved, she dreamed of feasts. Though unacknowledged, she held fast to the quiet certainty that her worth was greater than her stepmother's lies. The greed of her stepfamily chained her body, but it could not bind her spirit. The girl did not yet know it, but the cruelty that escalated so relentlessly was digging its own grave. For greed has no end and cruelty blinds itself. In demanding everything from her, the stepfamily was unknowingly preparing the ground for their downfall. And as the night whispered and the spirits stirred, the balance of power was beginning to shift, though they could not see it. The night that would change everything began quietly, like any other. The girl lay on her thin mat in the corner of the hut, her body aching from the relentless toil of the day. Her stomach twisted with hunger, for she had been denied food again. Her stepmother and step-siblings slept soundly, their bellies full, their cruel hearts content. Yet as midnight crept closer, The air within the hut thickened with a strange presence. The girl stirred, sensing something unusual. The silence of night was broken by faint whispers that seemed to float through the walls, not from outside but from within. At first she thought her mind was playing tricks, weaving sounds from her exhaustion. But the whispers grew clearer, like voices of ancestors speaking in a language both familiar and ancient. Her heart pounded, fear mingling with awe as she realized she was not alone. The air stirred gently at first, a soft breeze where no window was open. The flame of the small clay lamp flickered wildly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and bend with intention. A pot in the corner shifted slightly, scraping against the floor as though pushed by an invisible hand. The girl gasped, clutching her chest, but the movement did not feel hostile. Instead, it carried the weight of justice, as though unseen protectors had awakened at last. The whispers grew louder, now circling the room. Her stepfamily slept on, oblivious, though the girl could see the way shadows bent toward them, pointing accusingly. A gust of air rattled the roof, sending dust down like a warning from above. The girl felt fear, yes, but not the kind that crushed her. This fear was laced with a strange comfort, for deep within she understood. These spirits had not risen against her, but for her. Objects in the room continued to stir. A gourd toppled and rolled toward her feet, then stopped as if to assure her she was chosen. The woven mats on which her step-siblings lay rustled unnaturally, though no one touched them. Even the walls creaked with a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat, steady and deliberate. Each sign carried a message. She was not abandoned, she was not powerless, she was being watched over. Her fear slowly gave way to a trembling kind of faith. For years she had borne her suffering in silence, believing no one saw, no one cared. Yet here, in the depth of night, the unseen world revealed itself as if declaring, "We have seen. We have waited. The time has come." She pulled her thin blanket closer, her eyes wide yet no longer filled with despair. Instead of dread, a fragile calm washed over her. Though her stepmother had sought to strip her of dignity and hope, the spirits themselves had risen to protect her. Justice was not far, and the girl, tired, hungry and bruised, was no longer alone. At first, the stepmother and her children paid no attention to the strange occurrences that filled the house after midnight. A sudden gust of wind that extinguished the lamp, the sound of pots clattering without anyone near, or shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls, these were brushed aside with scornful laughter. "It is only the girl's clumsy hands," the stepmother said sharply whenever someone questioned. "She is cursed with weakness." But soon the events grew harder to dismiss. The stepmother woke one morning to find ashes from the hearth spread across her bed, though no fire had burned there. The eldest step-sibling swore she had heard faint singing in the dark, low, mournful voices that seemed to rise from beneath the floor. The youngest claimed to feel a cold hand brush her cheek in the night, though the hut was locked from within. Fear pricked at them, but arrogance dulled its edge. They laughed loudly in the daytime, mocking the idea of spirits, though their voices shook when the sun fell. The villagers, too, began to whisper of unusual happenings around the hut. Neighbors spoke of seeing lights flicker inside long after the fires should have died. Others claimed they heard the rustle of footsteps on the roof when no one was there. Yet the stepmother dismissed every rumor with sharp words, her pride unwilling to bend. "Spirits?" she scoffed. "If they exist, they serve me, not that worthless girl." Her arrogance became her shield, blinding her to the danger closing in. Inside the hut, however, the signs only grew bolder. At night, the food set aside for the girl would vanish, reappearing untouched near her mat, as if unseen hands rejected the cruelty. The step-siblings began to wake with strange marks on their arms, patterns of sand and ash pressed into their skin like warnings. They accused the girl, but her eyes, though weary, glimmered with innocence. Deep down they knew she could not be the cause, yet admitting the truth would mean confronting their own guilt. The stepmother, determined to maintain her control, grew harsher in response. "These are tricks of a lazy girl seeking pity," she snarled. She forced the girl to work even harder, hoping to drown out the whispers of justice. But the more she tightened her grip, the stronger the signs became. One night, as the family sat to eat, the clay bowls cracked suddenly in their hands, spilling food onto the floor. The girl, sitting silently in the corner, was untouched. Silence fell over the hut, heavy with dread, until the stepmother laughed too loudly, pretending the moment meant nothing. Yet each warning carried a message too clear to deny. The air grew colder at night, the walls groaned as if alive, and shadows moved without light to guide them. The step-siblings began to whisper among themselves, fear creeping into their arrogance. "Perhaps she is protected," one said nervously. Perhaps the ancestors watch her. But the stepmother silenced them with a glare. Ancestors protect the worthy, she spat. Do you think she, a servant in my house, is worthy? Still the spirits grew bolder. One night, the girl's mat glowed faintly under the moonlight streaming through a crack in the roof, while the rest of the hut lay in darkness. Another night, a voice, deep and ancient, filled the room. Enough. The step-family froze, their eyes wide, but again the stepmother forced laughter into the air. It is the wind, she insisted, though her trembling hands betrayed her. The girl, though frightened, began to sense the truth. The spirits were no longer whispering in secret. They were preparing for retribution, their signs growing too powerful to be ignored. What had begun as faint warnings in the shadows was now a rising storm of justice. And still, blinded by greed and arrogance, the step-family ignored the warnings. They mocked what they could not control, sealed in their own cruelty. They did not know that the spirits, patient and watchful, were merely gathering strength, preparing for the night when their arrogance would be shattered beyond repair. Midnight fell upon the village like a heavy cloak, and within the hut of cruelty, silence hung thick, broken only by the shallow breathing of those inside. The girl lay awake as she often did, her tired body refusing the comfort of sleep. She felt the shift in the air before it came, the deep stillness, the pause that always comes before a storm. Her heart beat quickly, yet she did not cower. She knew this was the hour the spirits had promised in whispers, the hour justice would no longer wait. The flame of the small clay lamp sputtered and died, plunging the hut into complete darkness. Then the air stirred, not with the soft breeze of an ordinary night, but with a force that carried weight and intention. A low hum, like 1,000 voices chanting from beneath the earth, rose and filled the room. The girl sat up, trembling, while her stepmother and siblings stirred from their slumber, confusion etched across their faces. The first sign came from the tools of her labor. The broom she had used that very day lifted slowly from the wall where it leaned, rising into the air as though held by invisible hands. Her step-siblings gasped, scrambling backward. The grinding stone in the corner shuddered, then rolled with force across the floor, circling like a predator. Pots rattled, gourds shook, and the pounding stick she used for grain lifted upright, standing like a guard ready to strike. Her stepmother tried to laugh, her voice breaking with fear. "It is a trick," she declared, though her eyes betrayed her terror. "Nothing but shadows." But the shadows no longer obeyed her command. They stretched across the walls, forming shapes of figures long gone, ancestors, guardians, spirits of justice. Their whispers grew into a roar that filled the hut. Enough. 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 The chaos began. The broom swung like a whip, striking at the step-siblings who had mocked her. The grinding stone rolled violently, chasing them as they screamed. Clay pots hurled themselves from shelves, shattering inches from the stepmother's feet. The pounding sticks slammed against the floor again and again, each strike shaking the hut as though the very earth joined in the retribution. The family was trapped, running from corner to corner, yet unable to escape. The door they rushed to flung shut with an invisible force, sealing them inside. The windows, though small, seemed to grow narrower, as if the spirits themselves bent the walls to keep the oppressors where justice demanded. The girl sat frozen in her corner, eyes wide, yet strangely untouched. Though the storm of movement filled the hut, no object harmed her. The broom that whipped her step-siblings passed her by gently, as though bowing in respect. The grinding stone rolled near her mat but stopped short, circling protectively rather than threatening. The spirits had risen not against her, but for her. Her stepmother, now frantic, shouted curses into the night. "Leave us. We are masters of this house. She is nothing, she is nothing." But her words carried no power. The shadows swirled, forming into faces, stern, watchful, full of judgment. They were not swayed by her lies. Each strike of the pounding stick, each crash of pots, each howl of wind through the roof spoke louder than her voice. "Your cruelty ends here." Her step-siblings fell to the ground, covering their heads, wailing in terror. The stepmother alone stood defiantly, though her body trembled. "I will not bow to shadows," she hissed, her pride clinging desperately to its last breath. But even as she spoke, the grinding stone rolled toward her with sudden force, knocking her to her knees. The broom lashed across her back, and the pounding stick slammed down beside her, sending dust and splinters into the air. The chaos rose to a fever pitch. The hut shook violently, walls groaning as if ready to collapse. The air was thick with dust, shadows, and the furious energy of justice unleashed. The girl closed her eyes, whispering a prayer not of fear but of gratitude. The spirits had come. They had seen her suffering, her patience, her innocence, and they had chosen this night to set the balance right. When she opened her eyes again, she saw her stepfamily cowering, trapped by the very tools they had once forced upon her. The broom that had worn her hands raw now punished them. The grinding stone that had stolen her strength now drove them back. The pounding stick that had bruised her arms now struck fear into their hearts. The night of reckoning had begun, and no force of arrogance, greed, or cruelty could silence it. The spirits had risen, and the oppressors were ensnared in the chaos of their own making. The storm of midnight chaos that had erupted within the stepfamily's home did not pass quickly. The walls seemed to groan with unseen weight, as if the spirits themselves pressed their judgment into the very clay. By the time silence finally returned, the household was no longer what it had been. The cruel stepmother, once proud and sharp-tongued, sat trembling in a corner, her eyes darting wildly as if seeing things no one else could. Her hair, once neatly tied, was wild and gray with sudden age. She whispered to herself in broken tones, begging unseen forces to leave her alone. It was as though her own mind had been torn apart, consumed by the very malice she had unleashed upon the innocent girl. The step-siblings fared no better. The eldest, who had often mocked the girl and stolen her portion of food, clawed at the air, screaming that brooms and stones were chasing him even in the daylight. He stumbled into the village streets, laughing and crying at once, until he collapsed in exhaustion, his words forever tinged with madness. The younger one, who delighted in throwing ashes and scraps at the girl, refused to leave the house, hiding in dark corners, muttering that shadows were alive and that every whisper was an ancestor calling his name. The once boastful children of the stepmother were reduced to fearful shells of themselves, undone not by human hands but by the judgment of the unseen. The villagers, drawn by the noise of the night, gathered at a distance by dawn. None dared enter the house at first, for they had heard crashing, screaming, and strange sounds that no mortal throat could produce. Some swore they saw flickers of firelight that left no smoke, or shadows moving across the walls though no one walked there. When the sun rose, the braver among them stepped closer and finally peered inside. What they saw silenced them all. The house, once neatly kept by the girl's endless toil, was in ruin, pots broken, tools scattered, and every corner heavy with an otherworldly stillness. The stepmother's face was pale with terror, her hands shaking as she tried to speak, but no clear word came out. Her sons crouched like frightened animals, wide-eyed and muttering. The cruelty they had once poured out had been swallowed whole and spat back upon them. Whispers spread quickly through the village. People who had once turned a blind eye to the girl's suffering now spoke in hushed tones about the judgment they had witnessed. Some remembered the girl's soft voice, her gentle way of greeting others despite her burden. Others recalled moments when she carried water for her stepfamily without complaint, her small frame bent but her spirit strangely unbroken. And now they saw with their own eyes what had become of her oppressors. There was no denying that a force greater than human strength had intervened. What had happened was not mere accident, nor coincidence. It was cosmic justice, raw and undeniable. The elders gathered beneath the baobab tree to speak of the matter. They concluded that the spirits of the ancestors had risen in defense of the innocent. For too long, cruelty had been allowed to thrive unchecked. The girl's suffering had been the silent cry that called the unseen to act. One elder stood, lifting his staff, and declared before the villagers, "Let this be known to all. The spirits watch us. They measure the weight of our hearts. To harm the innocent is to dig your own grave." His words spread, repeated in every household, until the story became a living lesson. The girl herself, unharmed by the chaos, stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. Some villagers approached her with awe, others with guilt. A woman who had once turned away when the girl carried heavy baskets now wept openly, asking forgiveness for her silence. The girl, though still weary from years of toil, lifted her eyes and answered softly, "It was not I who called the storm. It was the truth of what they did. The spirits only returned what was sown." Her words carried no malice, only the weight of honesty, and the villagers felt their hearts pierced by both shame and respect. In the days that followed, the stepmother and her children were unable to return to their old ways. Their minds and spirits were broken, and they could no longer wield power over the girl. Some say the spirits banished them from the village entirely, leading them wandering into the wilderness where no one ever saw them again. Others say they lived on, shadows of their former selves, reminders of what cruelty earns in the end. Whatever the truth, their downfall was clear, and no one doubted that the judgment had been just. The villagers began to treat the girl with a new reverence. Where once she had been ignored or mocked, she was now seen as one touched by unseen hands. She was offered food, rest, and kindness, though she asked for little. Her presence became a symbol of hope, a reminder that innocence, though fragile, was never truly defenseless. People told the story to their children, how a girl who had nothing but patience and quiet strength had been shielded by the ancestors, while those who tormented her had been swallowed by their own cruelty. And so, justice was served, not by the hands of men, but by the unseen powers that guard truth and balance. The tale spread far beyond the village, carried by travelers who whispered it as both warning and encouragement. It became a proverb on every tongue. Asterisk, the spirits see what the eyes ignore, the innocent are never alone. Asterisk. In the end, the girl's suffering had not been in vain. Her pain had drawn forth a lesson for the ages, one that no villager would ever forget. Cruelty leads to ruin, but innocence calls forth protection that no human hand can shatter. The village awoke to a morning unlike any it had seen before. For years, the girl's life had been a chain of endless toil, her body bent beneath burdens too heavy for one so young, her spirit quietly enduring scorn and cruelty. But now, the chains had been broken, not by her own hands, but by the spirits who had risen in her defense. The air itself seemed lighter, as though the night's chaos had swept away a great shadow. For the first time in memory, the girl did not wake to the harsh bark of her stepmother's voice, nor to the sharp kicks of her step-siblings. Instead, she opened her eyes to silence, silence that carried peace instead of dread. She breathed deeply, the morning sun warming her skin, and for the first time in years, her heart was unburdened. Word spread quickly through the village, the girl was free. The oppressors who had held her captive in endless servitude were no more. Whether driven mad, exiled by unseen forces, or consumed by the very spirits they mocked, they had fallen from power. And so, the girl walked into the village square not as a slave, not as a servant, but as herself, her posture straight, her eyes steady, her quiet dignity shining like a flame. The people stared, whispering among themselves, realizing how long they had ignored her suffering. Where once they had averted their eyes, now they could not look away. The elders gathered first. They called her forward, seating her beneath the shade of the great baobab tree, a place where only voices of importance were allowed to speak. One elder rose, his voice carrying through the crowd. "Child," he said, "your pain was seen by those beyond our sight. We were blind, but the ancestors were not. Today we honor your endurance, for you have shown us what it means to carry suffering with courage." His words were not only for her but for everyone gathered, and heads bowed in shame and respect. From that day onward, the girl's life changed. Villagers came to her with gifts of food, cloth, and kindness. Women who had once gossiped about her shabby appearance now brought her bracelets and beads, saying, "Wear these, for you deserve beauty." Men who had walked past her struggles with heavy baskets now offered to carry her load, ashamed of their silence. Children who had once mocked her now gathered at her feet, listening wide-eyed as she told gentle stories of hope and perseverance. Slowly, the scars of her past were softened by the respect she was finally shown. But though the village offered her abundance, the girl herself remained humble. She asked for no wealth, no special treatment, only the dignity to live free. She spent her mornings helping those who needed help, not out of obligation but out of choice. Her laughter, once hidden in fear, began to echo in the village lanes. She sang softly while fetching water, her voice carrying the weight of survival and the sweetness of renewal. People began to say that her voice itself was a blessing, bringing calm to troubled hearts. As weeks turned into months, her story spread beyond her own home. Travelers carried whispers of what had happened, the spirits who rose at midnight, the downfall of cruelty, and the girl who walked unbroken through the storm. Neighboring villages began to repeat her tale, weaving it into songs and proverbs. Some called her the daughter of the spirits. Others named her the survivor of the night. And always her story carried a warning: those who exploit the innocent invite destruction upon themselves. The elders preserved her tale carefully, passing it down as a lesson to every child. Around evening fires, parents told their sons and daughters, "Remember the girl who worked from dawn to dusk, yet did not break. Remember how the ancestors watched and waited until the time was right. Do not be cruel, for the spirits do not sleep." In this way, her suffering was not forgotten, but transformed into wisdom that shaped the lives of generations. For the girl, each day became a step toward healing. Though the shadows of her past sometimes lingered, she learned to walk in light. She planted a small garden by her home, growing herbs and flowers. To her, every seed that blossomed was proof that life could begin again, even after the harshest storms. Villagers often saw her tending the garden, her hands in the soil, her face calm, and they took comfort in her presence. She was no longer the weary, bent child of cruelty, but a young woman of resilience, carrying herself with grace. With time she became more than a symbol, she became a guide. When disputes arose in the village, people sought her counsel, for they trusted her wisdom, knowing she had endured more than most. When children misbehaved, their parents reminded them, "Do not bring shame upon yourself like the stepmother did, or the spirits will see." And when strangers passed through, they were told, "This is the village where the spirits rose at midnight to defend the innocent. This is the girl whose survival reminds us all to live justly." The girl herself, however, never saw herself as extraordinary. When asked, she would smile softly and say, "I only survive because the spirits are just. They defend those who cannot defend themselves." But the villagers insisted she was more than that. To them she embodied hope. To them she was proof that cruelty never wins, and that dignity, though quiet, outlasts oppression. Years later, when she grew older, the story of her youth had already become legend. Children sang songs about her courage, dancers reenacted the night of reckoning in festivals, storytellers lifted her name as a beacon. Her story was no longer just her own, it belonged to everyone, a shared reminder of what happens when justice stirs unseen. And so, her life was no longer bound by chains but by reverence. She lived free, respected, and loved. The village flourished under the weight of the lesson they had learned, for kindness became their shield and cruelty their greatest fear. In every heart, the truth was planted. The spirits protect the innocent, and no act of exploitation escapes the eyes of justice. Thus, the girl's dawn became the dawn of the entire village. A new beginning, bright with dignity, hope, and peace. Her name was carried like a flame through generations, and her story lived on forever. A legend, a warning, and a promise that the innocent shall never stand alone.